I'm going to let you in on something you won't see coming. I've spent decades pouring my heart into a home, only to realize one day I wasn't the one living under its roof. And in that moment, everything changed. That little pill bottle rolling across the floor wasn't just plastic and pills. It was the spark that forced me to reclaim my life. I'm Leia, a retired nurse who thought love meant endless sacrifice. I believed my name on the deed meant nothing more than a family courtesy until it nearly cost me everything. You're about to join me on a journey from feeling invisible in my own kitchen to rediscovering the power hidden in a single signature. Along the way, we'll laugh at the absurdity of family politics, feel the sting of betrayal, and celebrate the thrill of taking back what's rightfully ours. I promise you don't need a law degree or a courtroom drama to protect your home and your heart. Whether you're a parent, grandparent, or just someone who wants to guard what you've built, this story is yours too. So let's do something a little different today. Instead of trudging through cold, legal jargon, I'll walk you through each moment as if we're sitting over coffee, mixing real-life examples with practical tips and honest reflections. You'll meet the son who thought eviction was a power play, the lawyer who reminded me paper never forgets, and the neighbor who cheered when justice finally knocked. Most of all, you'll see that reclaiming your home is not about winning a fight. It's about honoring every ounce of effort, every sleepless night, and every sacrifice you've ever made. Ready to turn that spark into your own personal triumph? Let's dive into part 1, where we unpack the moment everything changed and learn why sometimes the smallest incident can light the biggest fire. I still remember the exact moment my world tilted on its axis. It wasn't a grand revelation or a dramatic confession. It was the soft thump of a small orange pill bottle hitting the tile floor, followed by the hiss of pills skittering under the refrigerator. My son stood across the kitchen island, fists clenched, eyes burning with something I didn't recognize in him: fury. In storytelling, we call that spark the inciting incident, the moment when life as you know it snaps in two. It's not just an event, it's the launch pad. For me, it was my own medication rattling out of its container. But for you, it might be a heated argument, a sudden diagnosis, or a final text message that shatters complacency. Whatever form it takes, the inciting incident does 3 crucial things: raises the stakes. Overnight, it turns everyday routines into urgent decisions, reveals true colors. It exposes buried resentments and hidden motives, forces action. It pushes you out of passive survival and into deliberate choice. I've studied family conflicts for years, both in my nursing career and in conversations with other caregivers. Time and again, I've seen how minor tensions, an offhand comment about the thermostat, a passive-aggressive note on the fridge, can simmer for months before exploding. Here's how to recognize those early tremors and imagine how they might lead to your own breaking point: unbalanced expectations. You're told you're helpful one day and a burden the next. When praise and criticism swing wildly, watch for the first harsh word. Territorial shifts. If your furniture gets shifted or your access to common spaces is subtly limited, pay attention. It's a test of your boundaries. Emotional withholding. When loved ones suddenly go silent or give cold shoulders, the emotional undercurrent is turning dangerous. These undercurrents are easy to dismiss until one small act lights the fuse. In my case, my pulse was already racing from missing a dose of heart medication. But when my son screamed, "You're a leech, You're not worthy of being my mother anymore. All the walls I had built around my feelings crumbled in an instant. Let's unpack exactly why that moment was so explosive. On a practical level, I was physically vulnerable. Missing my pills risked my health. On an emotional level, I was cornered in my own home, the place I'd thought was my sanctuary. And on a relational level, I realized he no longer saw me as family, but as an obstacle. When your ground shifts beneath you, ask yourself, what am I afraid of losing? Home dignity, health. What truth is finally surfacing? That gratitude has curdled into entitlement. What action is now unavoidable? A conversation, a legal move, packing a bag. In fiction, authors often prolong the tension before the hero strikes back. Real life doesn't wait. The moment you hear that blunt, "I want you gone," you know you have to decide. Do you stay and hope for an apology, or do you step back and reclaim control? I recall another story from my hospital days. Rosa, a 75-year-old grandmother, arrived in the ER after fainting at home. When she first walked in, she explained her dizziness as nothing serious. It turned out her granddaughter had been rationing Rosa's diabetic supplies, justifying it as budgeting. Rosa's breaking point came when she discovered empty vials hidden in the back of her medicine cabinet. She looked at that empty vial like I looked at my pill bottle, proof that love can turn corrosive without us noticing. That taught me this simple but vital lesson. A single misplaced bottle or unopened envelope can carry the weight of months, even years of neglect. Pay close attention to what's missing or out of place in your daily life. That absence can be far more telling than any loud outburst. At its essence, the inciting incident is less about the spectacle and more about the shift in perspective. Before that morning, I saw my son's small slights as isolated irritations. After the pill bottle shattered, I saw a pattern. I had traded my independence for invisible labor, expecting only love, but receiving escalating demands. Here's how you can dissect your own breaking point, pinpoint the trigger. Was it an argument, a physical mishap, or a cold document? Trace the backstory. What small grievances built up to that moment? Name the shift. How did your relationship with that person or situation change instantly? By naming these elements, you transform confusion into clarity and fear into empowerment. Of course, not every harsh word requires dramatic action. Sometimes, a heartfelt conversation or professional counseling can soothe raw feelings before they scar. But when the breaking point feels like a full-blown rupture in health, respect, or safety, that's your signal to step into decisive territory. I learned that lesson when my son turned away, refusing even a moment of compassion. I knelt on the kitchen floor, one hand on the cool plastic of the pill bottle, and thought, I can't pretend this is love anymore. That thought forced me to stand up in a new way, not as the submissive mother, but as a homeowner with rights and a person with needs. Before we move on to part 2, where I'll share the rich tapestry of sacrifices that laid the groundwork for this confrontation, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Have you experienced a small act that suddenly revealed a much larger problem? Maybe it was an unpaid bill, a door slammed in frustration, or a whispered comment passed off as a joke. Jot it down. Name it. That memory will become your own inciting incident in the first chapter in your story of reclaiming power. Up next, we'll dive into my backstory, exploring how years of silent sacrifices built both my strength and my vulnerability. you'll see how the very things that made me a dedicated mother and nurse also set the stage for the conflict to come. Let's turn the page together. If the breaking point was the spark, then my history was the tinder. Before I ever heard my son call me a leech, I'd spent decades pouring myself into every role I held: nurse, mother, wife, friend, until I lost track of where I began and everyone else ended. I trained as a registered nurse in the late 70s, drawn to the night shift, because that's when families needed a steady hand the most. I remember the flood of urgency in the ER as if it were yesterday, the antiseptic smell of bleach, the constant hiss of oxygen tanks, the hush that fell over the ward when doctors made their rounds. On my 10-minute lunch breaks, I'd eat saltine crackers, with my heart hammering, counting the seconds, until I could run into the next room and check on a frightened child, or hold the hand of someone who'd just received bad news. Every shift I worked, I kept one thought front and center: I do this so my son can have more. There was the year he graduated high school and needed a laptop for college. I'd already delayed replacing my worn winter coat and skipped meals to scrape together enough for a used model. I showed up at his dorm move-in day with tear-smudged cheeks and a cardboard box containing that laptop still humming with promise. I watched him set it up, and I felt a fierce pride. A few years later, when his favorite jeans finally frayed at the knees, I taught myself to sew patches by hand. I'd learned basic stitching from my grandmother, but I'd never had to repair denim so often. Each patch told its own story: baseball practice, camping trips, art class. When I handed him that pair of jeans, neatly mended, he smiled and said, "Thanks, Mom." Something about the way he said it made every stitch worth it. Then came the wedding ring. I always imagined I'd pass it down to my daughter-in-law or retrofit it into a new piece. But when my son announced his engagement and then later complained about moving costs, I did something I'd never dreamed of. I sold that ring at a pawn shop for what barely covered the down payment on his first car. I tucked the money into an envelope and handed it to him with a soft laugh. Don't spend it all in one place. Looking back, I can see that each sacrifice was a brick in the foundation I built under his future. But I didn't notice the cracks forming in the walls of my own life. In the early years, those sacrifices felt good. I was living out the role I'd been raised to believe in: the selfless mother who puts her child's needs above her own. My friends from the nursing unit would tease me about how I never treated myself. A spa day was practically mythical in my world. "Leia," they'd say, shaking their heads as I poured yet another cup of coffee, "when do you get to be the patient?" I'd laugh it off, but secretly, I wondered the same thing. Every birthday I celebrated for him, every milestone I cheered at, I marked another moment. I'd set aside my own comforts. I'd skip the heating in my bedroom when winter came, because I was sure he needed food more. I'd patch up my torn sweaters rather than buy new ones. I even delayed my annual checkup once because I was stretched thin financially and emotionally. Here's what that pattern taught me: kindness without boundaries can become its own prison. When we pour from an empty cup, eventually, there's nothing left to give, and everyone notices the dryness before you do. I still believe wholeheartedly in sacrifice for family, but I wish I'd learned earlier how to balance giving with self-care. A good rule of thumb I've since adopted is: ask yourself what you're giving up each time you say yes. If the answer is your health, your peace of mind, or your financial security, it's time to pause. One afternoon, a former colleague invited me to her retirement party. She'd amassed savings for travel, had a cozy home and a small nest egg that let her say yes to new adventures. I looked at her photos from her trip to the Grand Canyon and felt a pang of envy. It wasn't about the scenery, it was about the freedom she'd created for herself. I realized I'd spent my own sunset years building someone else's horizon. Yet, there's a flip side to sacrifice, the power of legacy. All those nights, I held a trembling hand in the ER, the dinners I cooked when my son came home from soccer practice, the quilt I stitched when he had measles. Those moments stitched me into the very fabric of his life. They're still there, even if he tried to erase them. When the day came that my son told me he wanted me gone, I could recite every unpaid bill, every late-night emergency, every empty larder I endured for his sake. Those memories became the evidence I gathered when I opened my safe to retrieve the deed. I didn't need to manufacture courage. I just had to remember exactly how much I'd already given and how little I'd asked in return. Before we move on to part 3 about how a welcome invitation can slip into uncomfortable expectations, take a moment to reflect on your own story. What are the acts of love you've woven through your life? What sacrifices have you made that, if forgotten, would leave a hole in your heart? Acknowledge them. Name them. Because those acts of devotion are not just tokens of affection. They're the proof you carry of your worth. Next up, we'll look at the chapter where kindness became a contract, how co-signing a mortgage turned into a legal and emotional minefield, and what you can learn from the fine print before you sign on the dotted line. After my husband passed away, I felt adrift in that big old house we'd shared for 40 years. My son's offer to move in seemed like a lifeline. Coffee at his table, again family dinners, and someone to share the quiet halls with. In my heart, it felt like love. Legally, it was a different story. When you invite someone into your home, the lines between guest tenant and co-owner can blur, and that blur can cost you dearly. In our case, I didn't realize how deep the blur ran until I found myself signing mortgage papers. My son's credit was shaky, and when the bank hesitated on his loan application, I volunteered to co-sign. He celebrated. I felt proud. I never stopped to ask, am I still a guest, or am I now a partner in this house? Co-signing a mortgage is more than a handshake. It places legal responsibility and rights squarely on your shoulders. From the lender's perspective, a co-signer is just as liable for payments and entitled to ownership. But from a family perspective, people forget that last part. I paid the down payment from my pension, covered repairs after foundation cracks, and even paid the first year of insurance. In return, I expected the courtesy of being consulted on major decisions, or at least thanked. Instead, those implicit expectations vanished under everyday practicalities. I've seen this pattern with other caregivers too. A friend of mine, Carla, moved in with her daughter to help care for her new grandbaby. They never discussed rent or bills, assuming family would figure it out. Months later, Carla discovered her daughter had refinanced the home solely in her name, leaving Carla legally invisible and financially unprotected. When the time came to sell, Carla had no legal claim, just fond memories. That taught me the hard way. Verbal agreements are fragile. If you're opening your door for the long term, take a moment to define the terms. Do you want to remain a guest, paying a fixed guest fee or rent? Or are you willing to become a tenant with a lease and the obligations that come with it? Or if you're offering significant financial support, Should you insist on co-ownership, documented in writing? Clarity from the start saves heartbreak later. When I finally realized I was more than a guest, I tried to set boundaries gently. I mentioned utility splits and fair shares one evening over dessert. Their responses ranged from confusion, "We never talked about that," to irritation. "We pay bills already. You don't need to chip in." I learned that once expectations solidify unilaterally, raising questions feels like betrayal. Here's a simple framework I wish I'd used: define roles up front. Are you a guest, temporary stay tenant, lease agreement, or co-owner, equity stake, and shared responsibility? State your terms. If you're willing to pay a portion of utilities or contribute to repairs, put it in writing. Specify amounts, schedules, and methods. Review periodically. Agree to revisit the arrangement every 6 months. Life changes, so should your agreement. I remember drafting a basic household agreement on a napkin, once listing chores and cost shares. My son laughed it off, but the act of writing it down signaled seriousness. It planted a seed of respect for boundaries, unfortunately, one that never fully grew in their minds. By co-signing the mortgage, I unwittingly escalated my role from gracious guest to silent partner. I had the same equity stake as my son, but none of the say in day-to-day decisions. Their home projects, decor choices, even major appliance upgrades, all happened without so much as a mom. What do you think? It was as if ownership had magically transferred from deed to assumption. If you're watching this and wondering whether to offer a spare room or sign a loan, please pause and ask yourself, what do I stand to gain or lose? Emotional warmth is wonderful, but if finances enter the picture, cold, hard facts must follow. A brief sit-down over tea to discuss expectations can prevent a lifetime of resentment. Looking back, I cherish that initial invitation, the chance to be near my family in my later years. But welcome, without clarity, turned into unspoken expectations that eroded my comfort. I learned that generosity without boundaries can become its own trap. Next up, we'll explore how those unspoken expectations morphed into subtle slights, the soft eviction of respect through shifting furniture, rationed utilities, and hushed whispers. We'll uncover the warning signs of escalating resentment and how to address them before they become irreversible. Let's turn the page to part 4 and equip you with the tools to spot those early red flags. If the move-in agreement was the soil in which our troubles took root, then the erosion of respect was the slow drip of water wearing away the foundation. It didn't happen overnight. It began with small, almost innocuous shifts, tiny inconveniences masquerading as practical decisions. But those small things add up, and before you know it, you're no longer a beloved guest or partner. You're just background noise. One of the first signs I noticed was the shifting of my personal space. My favorite armchair, where I'd nursed grandchildren on sleepy afternoons, suddenly appeared in the garage. My knitting basket, once in the corner of the living room, had been moved down to the laundry room beside the washer and dryer. It felt like someone was moving delicate glassware onto a lower shelf, not loud, not violent, but undeniably dismissive. Around the same time, I discovered my heating settings had been turned way down. In the summer, the air conditioner was an ongoing debate. Do you really need it on past 9 p.m.? I'd respond that I had arthritis and a slip disc, and the chill helped my back. They'd sigh and raise the thermostat just a notch, never enough to make me comfortable, but enough to remind me I was high maintenance. Then came the quietest of slights emotional distancing. I'd enter the kitchen with a cup of tea, only to be met with averted eyes or hushed conversation that stopped mid-sentence. Once I overheard my daughter-in-law tell a friend, "She's always here. It's like living with a ghost." Ghost, not grandmother, not guest ghost. That word slammed into me harder than any raised voice. Small annoyances can feel too petty to confront at first. Yet each one chips away at your sense of worth. In my years as a nurse, I learned that unaddressed pressure can build into a dangerous boil. Pressure ulcers start as tiny, reddened spots and become wounds if ignored. Likewise, tiny slights can fester until respect bleeds away entirely. Here are some early warning signs to watch for territorial motions. When personal items are relocated without discussion, it signals that your presence and possessions aren't valued. Resource rationing. Being questioned about normal utilities, heating, cooling, even Wi-Fi undercuts your comfort and signals a desire to minimize your use. Social exclusion. Invitations to family gatherings shrink, or your name gets left off group texts and emails. Hushed remarks, whispered jokes, or critical comments when you enter the room reveal growing contempt. Task creep. You go from family member to unpaid housekeeper, laundry dishes, errands, without thanks or even acknowledgement. Let me share a story about my friend Joan. After recovering from hip surgery, she moved in with her son for a few weeks. At first, he cooked dinner. He helped her to the bathroom. But soon, he began leaving her alone for hours, assuming she could figure it out. He changed the locks on her medicine cabinet, telling her it was for her own safety. Before long, she was sleeping on a thin mattress in the foyer because they needed the guest bed for college students. By the time she realized she was being marginalized, weeks had passed, and the emotional damage was done. That taught me a vital lesson. Small changes demand attention. If you notice even one warning sign, don't brush it aside as just part of family life. Name it. Talk about it. Write it down if you need to. When I first sensed the shift in our household, I attempted a gentle conversation. Over tea, I said, "I've noticed my chair isn't in the living room anymore. I miss sitting there." My son shrugged and replied, "But it's in the garage, plenty of space." His tone was polite but dismissive. I let it slide. 2 weeks later, I was in the laundry room, folding towels I'd washed for everyone, and the steam from the dryer blurred the words, "You don't belong here," into every corner. Another practical measure is to create a simple well-being checklist. Every week, jot down, how often was I invited to join family activities? Was I given a private space to rest? Did anyone consult me on household decisions? Were my personal needs, health, comfort, social acknowledged? If the answers dip below your comfort threshold, it's a signal to speak up or seek advice. Professional counselors, elder advocacy groups, or trusted friends can offer perspective before things spiral. Respect, like trust, is fragile and precious. It requires ongoing maintenance, honest communication, mutual acknowledgement, and genuine appreciation. If erosion goes unchecked, the landscape changes from welcoming home to hostile territory. In my journey, those early warning signs gathered momentum until they culminated in something far more dangerous: elder neglect and emotional abandonment. But it didn't start with big theatrical drama. It started with tiny relocations of my chair, slight increases in thermostat tension, and a whisper that turned my world cold. In Part 5, we'll explore how those small erosions led to a full-blown crisis point when my health needs were ignored, my medication withheld, and I faced neglect right in the place I'd always called home. We'll look at how to document medical emergencies, recognize legal definitions of elder abuse, and take swift, compassionate action when care turns to neglect. Let's move forward and learn how to stand up, not just for respect, but for our very well-being. Up until now, the signs were subtle. Misplaced chairs, hushed whispers, half-hearted invitations. But then came the moment. I knew this wasn't just family tension. It was neglect, something far more serious, something that threatened my health and safety. One morning, I awoke before dawn with my heart pounding. My chest felt tight, my vision blurred, and I realized I hadn't taken my heart medication. The little orange pill bottle was nowhere on the nightstand. Panicked, I shuffled down the hall, clutching my robe closed, and knocked on my daughter-in-law's bedroom door. No answer. I knocked again. My head spun. Finally, she opened the door a crack, eyes heavy with sleep, and said, "It's 6:30 a.m. Mom, you're being dramatic. Go back to bed." Then she closed the door. I stumbled toward the kitchen, vision fading. I collapsed on the floor, somewhere between the pantry and the counter, pain radiating through my chest. The dog barked upstairs. My grandson stirred, but nobody came. I lay there for what felt like an eternity, before crawling to my room to call May, my old friend. By then, my pulse was erratic, my breath shallow. I knew I should call an ambulance, but pride, fear, and frustration held me back. In the hospital later that day, the nurse gently told me I'd had a mild heart attack, triggered by missing my dose. As she spoke, I realized this was no accident. My medication hadn't gone missing naturally. It had been withheld. That was the honest truth. Elder neglect, whether intentional or not, is legally recognized in most states as a form of abuse. Neglect occurs when a caregiver fails to provide essential care, including necessary medication, nutrition, or supervision. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, neglect can be active neglect, deliberately withholding care or assistance. Passive neglect, unintentional failure to provide adequate care due to lack of resources or understanding. I was suffering active neglect. The people I trusted with my well-being were letting me collapse without help. After that scare, I made a promise to myself I would no longer tolerate any form of neglect. I began documenting every incident, dates, times, conversations. I saved torn clothing from my fall, took pictures of my bruises, and kept a daily log of my medication schedule and any lapses. It wasn't just my story. A woman I met at an elder rights workshop shared how her sister's fiancé refused to refill her thyroid medication, claiming she was attention-seeking. One morning, her sister nearly passed out in the shower. That slip nearly cost her life. Like me, she started logging every call to pharmacies, every doctor's appointment, and each text, reminding the fiancé to refill the prescription. Here's what I learned in those critical weeks. Document everything. Keep a health journal with dates, symptoms, missed doses, and witnesses. Photos and written notes are invaluable. Understand your rights. You have the right to timely medical care, access to your prescriptions, in a safe environment. If those rights are violated, you can report neglect. Report suspicious incidents. Adult Protective Services, APS, exists in every U.S. state. If you suspect neglect, you can make a confidential call and request an investigation. Seek outside support. Involve trusted friends, neighbors, or clergy who can check in on you regularly. When I first called APS, I worried about betraying my family, but the social worker was kind and professional. She explained that neglect is not a private family matter. It's a public concern when someone's safety is endangered. Within days, a caseworker came to the house, unannounced, spoke with me privately, and made recommendations for my protection. The crisis point, I realized, is the line between discomfort and danger. A flickering heater is one thing. A withheld inhaler is another. A misplaced sweater is one thing. A missing pill bottle is a symptom of a deeper illness in the family dynamic. During that period, I also reached out to an elder law attorney. She helped me understand how neglect could strengthen my legal position when reclaiming my home. An eviction notice is only as potent as the rights it enforces. By documenting neglect, I showed that I had already been deprived of the most basic care. One afternoon, after a particularly rough night of chest pains and ignored pleas for help, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal open. My pen hovered over the page, ready to record the next incident. My son passed by, looked at the journal, and asked, "What's that?" I simply smiled and said, "My life." He didn't press further. That moment underscored a powerful lesson. Your story is your power. When you can articulate the timeline of neglect, you shift from being a victim to being a credible witness. No one can argue with the paper trail you've created. By the end of that week, my health had stabilized and my resolve had hardened. I was no longer content to live in fear of my own family's indifference. I called my lawyer and said, "It's time." She began preparing the documents I'd need to assert my rights to the deed, and if necessary, to issue a formal notice to vacate. But before that, I knew I had to complete one more crucial step: understanding exactly where I stood legally. In Part 6, we'll dive into the legal pivot the moment I turned the tide, by reclaiming my rights, locating my deed, and drafting the paperwork that reminded my family whose home this truly was. We'll walk through how to check county records, confirm your ownership, and prepare for the next phase of asserting your boundary so that your safety and dignity are never compromised again. Let's move on and discover how knowledge of the law can become your strongest ally. When my heart finally steadied and the social worker's visit confirmed the pattern of neglect, I realized I stood at a crossroads. I could remain a sidelined guest, fragile, anxious, and dependent, or I could lean into the only thing I'd always truly owned, the deed to my home. That deed was more than a paper. It was my lifeline. I remember the afternoon I first opened the safe in my old bedroom closet. The light in that makeshift basement room was dim, but I didn't need much illumination to find the yellowed manila folder labeled Deed and Mortgage. My fingers trembled as I turned the dial, lifted the lid, and saw my name alone, typed in crisp ink on the original property deed. Beneath it lay 5 years' worth of mortgage statements, canceled checks, and down payment receipts. It was all there, the proof that I was the sole legal owner and that my son and daughter-in-law were in legal terms nothing more than tenants. Most of us assume that ownership in everyday language matches ownership in the eyes of the law. But that assumption can be costly. Here's how I took that pile of paper and turned it into my strongest shield. Locating the deed. Your first step in the United States, every property transfer is recorded at the county level, usually in the recorder's or register of deeds office. If you don't have the original deed handy, you can visit your county's official website and look for the property records or land records portal. Search by your name or parcel number to pull up recorded documents. Request a certified copy in person or by mail, often for a small fee. When I called my county recorder's office, the clerk walked me through the online search. Within minutes, I had a PDF of the original deed, complete with recording date book and page numbers, and my signature in shaky cursive. It felt like entering a digital vault where no one could deny my rightful claim. Understanding mortgage versus deed. It's common to confuse the mortgage, your promise to repay the loan, with the deed, your actual right to the property. As a cosigner, I was equally liable for loan payments, but the deed told a different story. Here's what to look for, grantor. The person transferring ownership, me in this case. Grantee, the person receiving ownership, only me, again. Legal description. The parcel's boundary, in technical terms, Lot 12, Block 5. Signatures and notarization validates the document. My lawyer explained that because only I signed the deed, my son held zero legal title, even though his name was on the mortgage. That distinction would become crucial the day I issued a notice to vacate. Interview with an elder law attorney I'll never forget, talking to Ms. Hernandez, an elder law specialist who works with families across our state. She said, most seniors underestimate the power of paper. A deed recorded in the county clerk's office is as close to invincible proof as you'll find. No amount of family pressure can erase your recorded ownership. She walked me through common pitfalls, informal transfers, handing over keys with only a verbal agreement, unrecorded deeds, signing a deed but failing to record it, leaving you technically unprotected. Joint tenancy misunderstandings. Believing in between names indicates separate shares when and can actually create rights of survivorship. Her bottom line, always verify that your deed is up to date, recorded properly, and reflects exactly who should hold title, common mistakes, and how to avoid them. Relying on memory. I thought my name was there. Instead, review the recorded document, ignoring secondary liens. Home equity loans or liens against the property can complicate matters. Pull a title report if you've co-signed any additional loans. Skipping legal advice. A quick call to an elder law attorney or title company can save years of headaches. I nearly made the mistake of trusting my son's assurances that everything is covered. If I'd waited for him to show me the papers, I might still be that frightened woman in the basement. Instead, I took control and asked the hard questions myself. Preparing your documentation. With certified copies of my deed and mortgage statements in hand, I organized them chronologically. I made 2 sets, one for my lawyer, one for my own records. Then, I drafted a simple cover memo to whom it may concern a name am the sole legal owner of the property at address, as evidenced by the recorded deed, Book X page Y, on date. Please accept the enclosed copies for your files. This memo became part of my evidence packet, which also included the elder neglect log from Part 5, a timeline of mortgage payments and down payment receipt, photographs of the storage room guest quarters, illustrating unsafe living conditions. When you prepare your own packet, remember, clarity and conciseness are your allies. Label each section clearly, include a table of contents, and keep originals locked away. Only share copies. Crafting the notice to vacate. Once I confirmed my ownership and documented the neglect, I was ready to take the final step, drafting a formal notice to vacate. My attorney provided a template with these essentials. Date of the notice, give at least 30 days, or check state law for minimum. Reason for eviction, non-payment of rent and documented neglect. Legal basis. As the recorded owner, I have the right to demand possession. Instructions. By what date they must leave and where to direct questions. I signed, it had it notarized, and delivered it via certified mail, ensuring there was no question about whether and when they received it. Turning paper into power met moment, slipping the eviction packet into the mail slot. felt like more than an act of departure. It was reclaiming every stitch I'd ever mended, every midnight meal I'd skipped, every moment I'd put someone else first. My signature on the deed and on that notice were twin declarations. I have rights worth defending, and I refuse to be invisible any longer. Before we move on to part 7, where we'll explore the art of a dignified exit, I invite you to pause and take stock of your own paperwork. Do you know where your deed is? Have you reviewed the recorded documents in your county office? If there's any doubt, make it your next project. Because when the time comes to stand up for yourself, paper evidence will be your strongest ally. In the next section, we'll talk about how to plan your departure with grace, how to communicate boundaries firmly, yet compassionately, gather your essentials without drama, and leave in a way that honors your dignity. Let's prepare to craft the exit that feels right for you. After I mailed that eviction packet, I felt both light and heavy light, because I'd reclaimed my agency heavy, because I still had to walk out that door. Exiting a home where you've lived years or even decades is more than packing boxes. It's about preserving your dignity and honoring the life you built there. Here's how I approached it, step by gentle step. 1. Choosing your timeline. Once the notice to vacate was served, I had a 30-day window. That may feel like a countdown clock, but it can also be your buffer for thoughtful planning. Assess your pace. Do you need the full 30 days to gather paperwork, sort through keepsakes, and arrange transportation? Or would you prefer a swift departure to avoid daily tension? Set mini deadlines. I created a simple chart: week 1 for legal and financial matters, week 2 for sorting belongings, week 3 for packing and scheduling movers or friends to help, week 4 for final cleaning and farewell notes. By breaking it down, I never felt overwhelmed. Each small win, a stack of sorted photos, a signed moving contract, gave me confidence for the next phase. 2. Communicating with compassion. You may not owe an apology, but you do owe clarity. I drafted a brief personal letter to my son and daughter-in-law, separate from the formal notice. It said, "I understand this is difficult. I cherish our memories, and I hope separation brings clarity for us all. I leave behind not anger, but the hope we each find peace." That note took less than 10 minutes, but set a tone of grace. When they saw my letter, alongside the legal documents, it reminded them, if only for a moment, that I wasn't an adversary, but a mother, asserting her worth. 3. Gathering essentials. Physically and emotionally packing is rarely just about clothes and photo albums. It's about deciding what truly matters. I made 3 piles. Must-haves, medications, important documents, a few favorite outfits, and the little ceramic mug my son gave me on his first day of kindergarten. Secondary comforts, my knitting kit, a stack of well-worn novels, family photo albums. To donate or discard extra furniture, they'd already relegated to the garage mismatched dishware. Each time I picked up an item, I asked, does this support who I am now? If the answer was no, it went into the donate pile. That process was surprisingly liberating. I realized my life didn't depend on every figurine or 5-year-old sweater. 4. Enlisting support. Going it alone is possible, but easier rarely means better. I reached out to 3 trusted friends: May, who offered her guest room; Joe, my neighbor from down the road, who drove my small furniture to storage; and my church group, who volunteered to help with packing and a farewell brunch. Logistics buddy. Someone who helps with heavy lifting and technical tasks, dismantling furniture, loading vehicles. Emotional advocate, a friend to call if you feel shaky, someone who reminds you of your strength. Celebration crew, those who gather afterward for cake or coffee to mark the new chapter. With their help, moving day felt more like a community event than a tactical retreat. 5. Managing the moving day. On the morning of my departure, I set my phone's alarm an hour earlier than the mover's arrival time. That gave me a quiet hour to brew coffee in my favorite travel mug, walk through each room, touching furniture one last time, and saying a silent thank you for the memories. Place a single sticky note on my bedroom door, home Leia's place. When the truck pulled up, I felt surprisingly calm. We loaded the boxes without fuss. I left behind the guest bed cot and the lumpy mattress items they had insisted on giving me. I took only what fit in one small U-Haul and one suitcase, my new life contained and clear. 6. The final farewell. Before locking the door, I taped an envelope to the inside of the front door, copies of the notice to vacate the deed, and a note, "Please take care of this home as you would an old friend." I did. Then I walked outside, closed the door gently, and locked it. No dramatic flourish, no slammed doors, just a quiet click and the satisfying weight of the key in my hand. 7. Settling into the next chapter. That afternoon, I arrived at May's house, carrying my suitcase and tote. She greeted me with warm tea and apple pie. "Welcome home," she said, and suddenly I believed it. My belongings, my deeds, my dignity, they traveled with me. The echo of my footsteps in the former family home faded, replaced by the gentle creak of May's rocking chair on her porch. Intentional pacing. Use your notice period as a planning tool rather than a source of panic. Graceful communication, a short, heartfelt letter, softens the legal formality. Selective packing, focus on essentials that reflect your identity and values. Community involvement. Don't underestimate the power of friends, neighbors, and local groups. Quiet closure, small rituals, thank you walks, sticky note farewells, create emotional resolution. Every step honored both my past and my future. A bridge between memories I cherish and possibilities I eagerly embrace. As we move into part 8, we'll examine the aftermath and accountability, what happened to my son and daughter-in-law, how the community responded, and the broader consequences of standing up for your rights. Their scramble, their regret, and the surprising turn of events that followed will all offer lessons on why a dignified exit can lead to genuine accountability, for better or worse. Let's continue to see how our story unfolds. Once my boxes were unloaded at May's, and my front door clicked behind me, the ripples of that eviction notice spread faster than I could have imagined. My son and daughter-in-law were left scrambling, frantic phone calls, panicked texts, and rounds of lawyer consultations. What started as a quiet reclaiming of my rights turned into a community spectacle, and everyone felt the effects. The son and daughter-in-law, from power to panic. Within hours of the notice being served, my son stormed into the local sheriff's office, clutching his phone and pleading ignorance. I had no idea she even owned the deed. His lawyer sighed when I arrived with my certified copy and records of every mortgage payment. Suddenly, the table had turned. He went from asserting control over the home to begging for time. They ended up in a nearby motel, 2 towns over, paying daily rates on his weakened credit. Their SUV sat half-packed in the driveway, low on gas, while they argued over who would call the bank next. It wasn't the glamorous rebellion they had imagined when they first asked me to move in. Instead, they faced the real-world consequences of having no legal claim and no plan B. My daughter-in-law, who once scoffed at my high-maintenance requests, now spent her days on hold with credit unions and eviction attorneys. The same appliance repair person who used to text me for emergency fixes now refused to respond to her calls. He feared not getting paid. Their friends backed off too. Some took sides, others simply distanced themselves from the family drama. Community response: neighbors, friends, and strangers. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Mrs. Jenkins, who once told me, still here with a tight grin, called to apologize. She'd seen them packing boxes under the rain and felt compelled to reach out. "I'm sorry you endured that," she said. "No one should be treated like a ghost in their own home." Then there was Pastor Evans from my church. He offered his office's conference room if they needed temporary shelter. He didn't side with either party, but reminded all of us, accountability isn't vengeance. It's truth in action. He invited them and me to a mediation session, though they never showed. Meanwhile, May's little neighborhood group rallied around me. They pitched in to help me sort through documents, lent me a car when mine needed repairs, and sent cards with encouraging verses. Their kindness underscored a powerful lesson: standing up for yourself can inspire others to be kinder too. The sale of the house, a new chapter. After the 30-day window closed, they still hadn't found a place. Their motel fund dried up, and no landlord would take them with an eviction on their record. I decided not to leave the house empty. I listed it with a trusted real estate agent who specialized in historic homes. Enter Sherry, a single mom, working at the post office, saving for her own family's future. She toured the house the day after it went on the market and fell in love with the oak-paneled library and the wraparound porch. I offered her a price she could manage well below market value, because I wanted someone who would cherish the home, not tear it down. Sherry closed in 2 weeks. I watched her host her kids as they ran barefoot on the lawn, just as my son once did. In handing over the keys, I felt no bitterness. I felt relief. The house that had been the battleground was now a sanctuary again, for someone ready to fill it with kindness rather than conflict. The son's return bid humility meets resolution. A few months later, I glanced out my window and saw my son's figure by the mailbox. He looked smaller than I remembered, haggard, remorseful. He handed me a paper bag inside, which were his last savings, and a hand-written note. "I'm sorry. Please sell the house back to me." Sherry, ever the protector of her new home, told him gently, "I bought this house from a woman who knew her worth. You lost that when you forgot who she was." My son turned, walked away, and hasn't knocked since. Broader consequences, statistics, and realities. Their eviction story is far from unique. According to national data, roughly 1 in 50 U.S. households will face an eviction filing in their lifetime. Of those, nearly 30% end up homeless or in unstable housing situations within a year. The emotional toll ripples through families and communities alike. Children change, schools, healthcare suffers, and financial scars run deep. In my son's case, the eviction record has made credit nearly impossible. He's learned the hard way that defaulting on a lease or eviction isn't just a momentary setback. It's a label that follows you. Accountability without animosity through it all. I've aimed to separate accountability from vengeance. I never sought to destroy my son's future. I sought to remind him and myself of the power inherent in respect and honesty. In the weeks after the sale, I wrote him a letter offering to help him rebuild his credit score and place rental references for him as long as he agreed to counseling on family communication and financial management. He never responded, but the offer stands. That approach taught me something vital. Accountability doesn't require hatred. You can hold firm boundaries and still wish someone well. You can insist on respect and still offer a hand to help them recover. Eviction isn't only about rent. Not paying rent is one cause. Living for free and abusing the privilege is another. The law typically treats unauthorized occupancy as a basis for eviction. A clean title protects all parties, keeping property records up to date, understanding co-signing risks, and maintaining liens in good standing helps prevent surprise evictions. Community support matters. Engaging neutral third parties, neighbors, clergy, support groups can diffuse conflict and provide emotional and logistical help. Long-term consequences linger. Eviction records and damaged credit don't vanish overnight. They affect job applications, loan approvals, and more. As this chapter closes, we've seen how a dignified exit triggers real consequences and real accountability for everyone involved. In Part 9, we'll shift focus to prevention, identifying the most common pitfalls when co-signing loans or inviting family into your home, and exploring concrete steps you can take before any breaking point arrives. We'll distill the wisdom of every tough conversation, every lawyer's advice, and every community intervention into a set of best practices that protect both your property and your peace of mind. Let's prepare to learn how to build boundaries that honor love without sacrificing security. By now, you've walked through my journey from the first crack in our relationship to reclaiming my home and watching the fallout for my son and daughter-in-law. Along the way, one theme has emerged again and again: co-signing without clear boundaries is like sailing without a compass. It feels supportive, but you risk drifting into dangerous waters. Here are the lessons I wish I'd known before I ever inked that mortgage agreement. Mistake number 1, relying on verbal agreements. When your child, or anyone you love, asks you to co-sign it, feels natural to say, sure, and trust that family honor will prevail. But without writing down who covers what, confusion creeps in. Early on, I assumed my financial contributions would translate into decision-making power. Instead, my son and daughter-in-law viewed the mortgage as theirs to manage, with my name merely added for credit approval. A friend named Tony once co-signed his daughter's student loan repayment plan based on a handshake. 5 years later, when he asked about his share of payments, she'd lost track of amounts and dates. Neither party had records, so Tony ended up paying more than his fair share out of guilt, not clarity. Always put contributions and expectations in writing. A simple one-page co-signer agreement can outline each person's financial commitment, decision rights over repairs or refinances, and an exit strategy if circumstances change. Mistake number 2, skipping the fine print. Mortgages and leases come with pages of legal jargon. I confess I skimmed the documents, focused on the interest rate, and glossed over sections about ownership rights. I didn't realize that being on the loan didn't automatically mean being on the deed, nor that certain clauses could affect my tax deductions and liability in case of foreclosure. Consider the case of Maria, who co-signed her son's home equity line of credit, HELOC. She assumed she'd share ownership, but the deed never changed. Years later, when the market dipped, she learned she was on the hook for debt without any equity cushion. Lesson review. Every document carefully. Or better yet, have an attorney or title specialist walk you through the key clauses. How ownership is vested, joint tenancy, tenants in common, etc. What happens in case of default or refinancing. Whether your name appears on the title insurance policy. Mistake number 3, no exit strategy. Life is unpredictable. Relationships shift, finances wobble, health changes. Yet many co-signers never discuss how to unwind the agreement. I never asked my son, if things change, how do we part ways? As a result, I was trapped in a legal partnership that felt more like servitude. My neighbor Angela included an exit clause in her co-signer agreement with her daughter. If her daughter refinanced in her own name, within 5 years, Angela would be released from liability. Having that clause gave Angela peace of mind. She knew exactly what steps to take to disengage financially if needed. Lesson: build an exit strategy into the agreement. Include conditions and timelines under which a co-signer can be removed or the property sold. That way, if your circumstances shift, like retirement income changes or health issues arise, you're not stuck indefinitely. Mistake number 4, forgetting periodic reviews. Signing on can feel like set and forget, but set it and forget it at your peril. After the mortgage closed, I rarely thought about it until trouble erupted. Meanwhile, interest rates shifted, property values changed, and my son's credit score wobbled all matters I should have monitored together. Take Ben, whose father co-signed a rental lease for his apartment. They agreed to split utilities 50-50, but never revisited the terms. 2 years later, their bills tripled after a rate hike, and neither had budgeted for it. The resulting argument left their relationship frayed. Lesson schedule, semi-annual check-ins, review statements, insurance renewals, and property tax notices together. Use these check-ins to confirm everyone's comfortable with the financial arrangement or to renegotiate terms if needed. Mistake number 5, overlooking state-specific protections. Real estate and lending laws vary widely across states. I never considered how Georgia's co-signer statutes might differ from, say, California's or New York's. If I'd moved in with family elsewhere, I might have had additional safeguards or fewer. For example, some states like Massachusetts require co-signers on residential mortgages to be notified of default or foreclosure proceedings. Others mandate co-signer release clauses for auto loans after a set number of on-time payments. Knowing your state's protections can make a huge difference in your recourse options. Lesson: research your local laws or consult an elder law attorney. Ask, are there mandatory disclosure requirements for co-signers? Can you request a co-signer release after a certain period? What consumer protections exist if the primary borrower defaults? Preventive measures: building strong boundaries, define roles clearly before co-signing, clarify whether you're a passive guarantor, an active equity partner, or merely providing temporary support. Align your expectations accordingly. Set financial caps. Decide the maximum amount you're willing to cover, whether it's the down payment, half the mortgage, or a fixed monthly sum cap. Your exposure to avoid open-ended liability. Document everything. Use dated, signed documents for each agreement, change, payment shifts, refinancing decisions, or personal loans. Digital records, PDFs with timestamps work too, just back them up securely. Use professional advice. Engage a real estate attorney, a financial planner, or a trusted title company before you sign. A 60-minute consultation can save you years of stress. Keep separate accounts. Maintain your own bank and retirement accounts distinctly from any joint accounts you open. That way, if disputes arise, your personal assets remain insulated. Co-signing doesn't have to end in heartbreak. With clear agreements, periodic reviews, and a grounded understanding of your legal landscape, you can support loved ones without sacrificing your security. In Part 10, we'll gather all these threads into actionable tools and resources, checklists, national hotlines, legal aid directories, and community organizations to empower you to protect your home, your health, and your peace of mind. Let's dive into the final chapter, real-world resources that turn lessons into lifelong safeguards. 10. Empowerment and resources. Tools for protecting yourself. When I look back on my journey, from that spilled pill bottle on my kitchen floor to reclaiming my home, with my own 2 hands, I realize the most powerful weapon wasn't anger or even legal knowledge. It was preparation. The sense of security I've built since then comes from knowing I have the right tools and resources at my fingertips. Today, I want to share those with you so you can protect your home, your health, and your peace of mind before you ever face a crisis. 1. Keep your paper trail organized. Everything begins with documentation. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that paper remembers long after memories fade. Here's how to stay ahead. Central filing system. I use a dedicated binder at home labeled Important Documents. Inside, I keep the original deed or a certified copy, mortgage statements and proof of payments, home equity or HELOC agreements, insurance policies, homeowner's flood umbrella, health directives, living will power of attorney, digital backup. I scan each document and store encrypted PDFs in a cloud folder, Google Drive, Dropbox, etc. That way, if the binder travels with me, my family or attorney can still access the files online. Routine audit every 6 months. I schedule a paper audit day. I verify that each document is current, no expired policies or missing signatures, and update the binder accordingly. By keeping everything in one place, I've saved myself and could save you hours of scrambling when time is of the essence. 2. Financial safeguards, separate but supported. When I first co-signed that mortgage, I blurred the lines between my retirement fund and my family's expenses. Now I keep a clear boundary, dedicated home expense account. I maintain a separate checking account for any mortgage insurance or repair contributions. My automatic transfers go out on the 1st of each month, and I never dip into my personal savings for household needs. Credit monitoring. I subscribe to a low-cost credit monitoring service that alerts me to new inquiries, loans, or unexpected changes. That way, if someone tries to co-sign another loan in my name, I'm notified immediately. Cap your liability. If you're considering co-signing, decide on an absolute maximum, let's say $25,000, and don't exceed it. Once that cap is met, you're off the hook legally and financially. This approach lets me offer support when needed without erasing my own safety net. Legal resources. Know where to turn. Even with the best organization, you may need professional guidance. Here are some avenues worth exploring. Elder law attorneys. These specialists understand both real estate and elder care issues. Many offer a free initial consultation. Ask about co-signer release options, deed transfers, and elder abuse statutes in your state. Legal aid societies. If budget is a concern, nonprofit, legal aid organizations often provide pro bono services for seniors. In Georgia, for instance, The Georgia Legal Services Program has an elder rights division. Similar programs exist in every state. Adult Protective Services, APS. If you suspect neglect or abuse, APS investigates and can intervene. Their hotline is confidential and available in all 50 states. Look up your local number online. Mediation Services. If you want to address family tensions without going straight to court, community mediation centers can facilitate neutral conversations, often at low or no cost. When I called my elder law attorney after the hospital scare, she mapped out a clear plan document: notify, then negotiate or litigate if necessary. That clarity was worth every penny. 4. Use checklists and schedules. Structures, like calendars and checklists, transform intentions into habits. I set reminders on my phone labeled Home Safety Check, so I never miss these critical routines. You might use a paper planner or a digital app, whatever keeps you on track. 5. Community and support networks. Isolation is a vulnerability. I deliberately built a network of people who watch out for me. Neighborhood check-in group. My block has a text thread where we share news, power outages, weather alerts, or simply, Leia, did you get your mail? Church and social clubs. Every Thursday, I volunteer at the local senior center. It keeps me active, connected, and alert to others' experiences, sometimes spotting red flags in a friend's story before they do. Professional caregiver referrals. Even if you're healthy now, keep the number of a vetted home health agency or a trusted caregiver. Having that info ready means you can act swiftly if health needs change. Family. Allies identify at least 2 relatives or close friends who understand your intentions and can intervene if needed. I've named May and my niece as backup decision makers if something ever happens to me. When we build community, we create multiple safety nets rather than relying on a single rope. 6. Digital tools and apps. Technology can augment your paper and person-to-person efforts. Password manager, store login, credentials for your online accounts, banking property portals, legal services securely. That prevents lockouts if someone tries to change your passwords. Shared calendars. Use a family shared Google Calendar for key dates, mortgage due dates, doctor appointments, legal check-ins. Everyone invited stays in the loop. Voice memos and photos. If you ever feel uneasy in your living situation, furniture being moved, damaged property, missing pills, record a quick voice note or snap a photo. These time-stamped items can be invaluable evidence. My digital trail proved decisive when I needed to show exactly when and where neglect occurred. A photo of my collapsed form in the hallway, time-stamped by my phone, helped APS prioritize my case. Empowerment isn't a single act. It's the sum of many small choices. Organizing your papers, setting financial boundaries, keeping up with the law, leaning on community, and leveraging technology. When combined, these tools create a fortress around your autonomy and well-being. Before I sign off, I want to leave you with a simple mantra that's carried me through hard times. Preparation is peace. Every hour you invest now saves days of distress later. Every document you file, every discussion you hold, every app you set up, all of it adds up to freedom. You've reached the end of this 10-part journey, but the real work and reward begins now. Here are 3 action steps you can take today. Audit your documents. Find your deed insurance policies and health directives. Make sure they're updated and backed up. Schedule a family check-in, whether over coffee or a weekend lunch. Discuss household expectations, financial roles, and personal boundaries. Connect with a resource. Call your local APS hotline, Elder Legal Aid Office, or a trusted attorney for a brief check-in on your rights. If you do nothing else, start by picking one item from this list and doing it before tomorrow's sunset. You'll be planting a seed of security that grows stronger every day. Thank you for walking this path with me. I hope these tools empower you to stand firm in your worth, protect your legacy, and live every chapter of your life with dignity and grace.